NBC News has obtained a copy of a new book by Mary Trump, President Trump's niece. It paints the president as a, quote, emotionally damaged narcissist who cheated his way to success. NBC News White House correspondent Peter Alexander has more.
In her blistering new tell-all book, President Trump's niece, Mary Trump, a trained psychologist, slams her uncle as a narcissist who's unable to experience the entire spectrum of human emotion. Ms. Trump details a dysfunctional family led by a domineering father, Fred Trump Sr., who she writes was emotionally abusive and perverted his son's perception of the world and damaged his ability to live in it.
My dad, Fred Trump, was the smartest and hardest working man I ever knew.
On the night her father, Fred Trump Jr., died of an alcohol-induced heart attack, she claims the family sent him to the hospital alone while Donald Trump had gone to the movies. Why reveal family secrets? She writes, if President Trump is afforded a second term, it would be the end of American democracy. And goes further in describing her decision, she says, to provide some of the president's tax documents to the New York Times. Quote, I had to take Donald down. About the president's self-proclaimed brilliance.
I'm an extremely stable genius.
Ms. Trump, who's nearly 20 years younger than the president, claims her uncle enlisted a friend to take the SATs for him. Donald, who never lacked for funds, she writes, paid his buddy well. An allegation the White House calls completely false. Overnight, Alice Frankston, a friend of Mary Trump authorized to speak on her behalf, explained why she wrote the book.
Mostly, she wants to get across that her uncle is really dangerous, and she has the unique perspective of having had a ringside seat to this family her whole life.
Ms. Trump says the president's sister, Mary Ann, a retired federal judge, mocked her brother's 2016 candidacy. He's a clown. Mary says Mary Ann, a devout Catholic, was furious that evangelicals backed her brother. Quoted as saying, the only time Donald went to church was when the cameras were there. It's mind-boggling. He has no principles. The White House blasts the book as fiction.
It's ridiculous, absurd allegations that have absolute no bearing in truth. Have yet to see the book, but it is a book of falsehoods.
Peter Alexander reporting there. The president's niece, Mary Trump, already is under a gag order until a judge hears arguments on the merits of Robert Trump's lawsuit to stop the book's publication. Last week, a New York appeals court determined publisher Simon & Schuster may go forward with the release of the book, though Mary Trump is temporarily halted from publishing. She signed a non-disclosure agreement as a condition of an inheritance settlement that her uncle argues prohibits her from writing about the Trump family. The seeming legal contradiction of gagging the writer, though not the publisher, has left the book in the hands of a number of media outlets. Robert Trump, the president's younger brother, is asking a judge for an emergency gag order that covers the publisher as well. Let's bring in legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, Maya Wiley. Maya, it's good to see you this morning. This is confusing, I think, to the layman and I think to anyone really listening. So the gag order for Mary Trump does not apply to the publisher, so the book can be released. How does that work exactly?
You're right that it's very confusing for most people. Let's pull it apart. You know, what Robert Trump says in his suit is that Mary Trump was not allowed to say anything about Donald Trump and the family based on a non-disclosure agreement she filed back in the 1990s when they were fighting about her father's estate. So what he's saying is there's a contract that prevents her from talking. There's no contract with Simon & Schuster. So the question here is, if she shouldn't have talked, what is the remedy if it is in fact a breach of contract? And essentially what the appeals court is saying is, I don't know whether or not there was a breach of contract or not. I can't figure that out. I don't have those facts. But what I do know is it doesn't cover Simon & Schuster. So Simon & Schuster, having already sent out 75,000 books, they were already in the mail, so to speak, to booksellers, said that, and the reason that's so important is because, as we saw from civil liberties groups saying, this is free speech. So Simon & Schuster, to tell Simon & Schuster, you can't share free speech because someone else signed a non-disclosure agreement really endangers what free speech is and also endangers the public interest in having free speech because Donald Trump is a public figure. He's a sitting president, and voters have a right to assess and make their own assessment about what Mary Trump has said in her book.
So it protects Simon & Schuster, but if there is in fact a signed NDA with Mary Trump, isn't she breaking the NDA by putting all these stories into a book and then handing it to Simon & Schuster, which may have some protection when it goes to publish it? Is that NDA valid?
Well, we don't know. Certainly, that's part of what the court is going to look at in considering whether or not, you know, the Trump family is right in suing her in the first place. But here's the thing. If Mary Trump is in fact bound by a non-disclosure agreement, the question is, what do you do about it if she violated it? In this case, I think part of what's happening here is the court, which I think is rightly sort of suggesting, is then you get damages. Then you get to make her pay. But you don't get to stop the speech itself necessarily once it's already, and plus it's already out there, right? So this is not something, as Simon & Schuster said, like it's already up on Amazon with a picture of the back cover of the book. 75,000 booksellers have it. And we're not covered by a non-disclosure agreement. So it's that Mary Trump may have to pay.
So bottom line, Maya, will this book be on the shelves next week? Will it be in people's hands?
You know, I can't say for sure, but I certainly believe that the right outcome here is that book be on the shelves for sale.
All right, Maya Wiley, thanks so much for your insights. We needed it this morning into a complicated legal story. Good to see you. Jonathan Lemire, how is the White House handling this? Obviously, we saw Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, come out yesterday, dismiss it out of hand as being a book full of lies. What's the level of concern inside the West Wing about some of the stories that have come out of this so far?
Truthfully, it was a neat trick for her to dismiss it as a book of lies after saying, I haven't read it. Which seems to be sort of how the White House operates on a number of levels these days. Sure, they did eventually put out a statement. They were very dismissive of this. They focused on two things in particular, saying that the president did have a good relationship with his father. The book charges that Fred Trump was emotionally abusive to Donald. That sort of shaped him to be the person that he is today, and made a point of saying that the president did not pay anyone to take his SATs. We know how much the president does like to talk about all the good schools he went to, and how intelligent he is. Certainly, it's a distraction that they don't particularly care for. I don't think there's a huge level of concern about what this will change voters' minds about him. It certainly doesn't rise to the level of the John Bolton book of a few weeks ago, and which, of course, another book they tried to stop from seeing the light of day unsuccessfully, because whether or not this suit is whoever wins, whether the book is on for sale next week or not, a copy is already in all the newsrooms across the country. The excerpts are already out. The White House is looking to, pardon the pun, the White House is looking to turn the page.
Let's bring in Alice Frankston. She's a woman we saw in Peter Alexander's report. She's a childhood friend of Mary Trump, who is authorized now to speak on Mary's behalf because, as we've been pointing out, Mary is not doing media under that gag order. Alice, thanks for being with us this morning. First of all, your relationship to Mary Trump, you go back to, I guess, summer camp days when you were kids. You've known her for a long time. So in the context of this conversation, did she share some of these stories with you in real time? Do these ring true to you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I've been with her talking about this and reading through things with her since the beginning when she started to write this and when she even thought about writing it.
And why is she doing this right now? What does she believe is the significance of putting out a book like this, let's say 3.5 months before Election Day?
She felt morally obligated. She felt it was her duty to let the American people, if not the world, know and understand who's in charge and the foundation of how he got to be the way he is, what her opinions and views are of it. Why now is look at what's going on in the world between a global pandemic being ignored. There's a complete lack of leadership. kids at the border, food insecurity, any number of things have really frustrated her, and she stands a lot to lose. I think it was very brave of her to come forward at any point, frankly, but now is when it's most crucial. The country's at a tipping point.
She makes some explosive claims in the book, among them that Donald Trump, young Donald Trump, paid someone to take the SAT for him. Is there documentary evidence of that? Is there a witness? Has she found the person who took the test?
She spoke with multiple sources, including people in her family. It would be great if she could be here to tell her stories firsthand, but she's been muzzled by her uncle in a most unprecedented way. But yeah, these are her accounts. She's always been a truthful person. I've known her to be a truthful person her whole life, who stands everything to lose. She's also somebody who never utilized her name. She always flew under the radar her entire life, quite elegantly, I might add. It's not a revenge piece or anything of the sort. She feels this information is important, and people need to know who's in charge.
Jonathan Lemire has a question for you. Jonathan?
Okay.
My question is a simple one. We just had our legal analyst talk about the NDA. Why does Mary Trump believe it doesn't apply to her? What is the legal standing for that?
I mean, her attorneys are managing it, but from what they say, the NDA was entered into fraudulently because they undervalued and misstated a number of values of the estate of her grandfather and the properties that were a part of it. So if it was based on fraudulent terms, I guess their argument is that it's null and void.
All right, Alice Frankston here on behalf of Mary Trump, who, as you said, cannot speak with us right now, talking about her new book. Alice, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it this morning.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.